Good morning and welcome to Mass Memorial Virtual Sunday School. Theme for the quarter, the testimony of faithful witnesses. Unit 3, faithful witness spread the good news. Sunday, August 16, 2026. Lesson title, Tell Me What You Know. Acts 22, 3 through 15, King James Version. Our key verse, and he said, The God of our fathers has chosen thee, that thou shouldest know his will, and see that just one, and shouldest heard the voice of his mouth. For thou shalt be his witness unto all men of what thou hast seen and heard. Acts 22, 14 through 15, King James Version. The aim for this lesson is to retell Paul's call and commissioning story, comparing and contrasting it to our own story of conversion and discipleship. Also to celebrate the witnesses for Christ who have encouraged your own walk with Christ, and to develop ways of witnessing for Christ so that others may be encouraged to serve. Our lesson background, here we are in the New Testament, the book of Acts. I'll just give a short synopsis of what this lesson is about. The book of Acts was written by Luke, the physician, and it serves as a history of the early church fulfilling the Great Commission as commanded by Christ to his disciples to be his witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the surrounding regions, and the world, beginning in chapter 13 and continuing to the end of the book. Paul becomes the central figure in Christianity's expansion beyond Samaria and Judea. The backstory of Acts 22 covers the events that occurred after Paul returned to Jerusalem from his third missionary journey. I'm separating the characteristic of Saul and Paul, even though they're the same person. But Saul is the name given to Paul before he was converted. And he was often called Saul of Tarsus, where he was born. Saul was a Jew and a Roman citizen. Saul persecuted both men and women into imprisonment and death. And at the time of his conversion, he was on his way to Damascus to bring back prisoners to Rome to be punished when his conversion occurred. Now, as Paul, after his conversion, he returned from his third missionary journey, and some of the Jews from Asia accused him of defiling the temple by bringing Gentiles into the temple. Gentiles was anybody that was not a Jew, thereby inciting a riot and leading to his seizure by the crowd. And before his arrest by the Roman commander helped to keep Paul safe and enable him to speak to the crowd later in his defense by explaining his Jewish heritage, his former life as a church persecutor, and his conversion on the road to Damascus. So by Paul being a Roman citizen, it was helpful because the crowd was about to kill Paul because they figured he violated bringing people into the temple that were not Jews. Ananias is important in this lesson because this is the person that Christ ordered Paul to go see after he was blind. And Ananias was a follower of Jesus who was told in a vision to go to the street called Straight. And Saul of Tarsus, who was blind after his encounter with Jesus. And Ananias overcame his fear of Saul, who had been arresting Christians. And so he laid hands on him to restore the sight and baptize him. Ananias served as the Jewish high priest roughly from AD 47 to AD 58. Now, it took a lot for Ananias to do this because he knew that Paul, before his conversion, was known to persecute Jews and to kill the Jews. And so he was a little bit skeptical, but he was told in a dream to go and find Saul, who was blind at the time. So in our scriptures, our first set of scriptures are faithful witness credentials. And we're going to read Acts 22, 3 through 5. Acts 22 and 3. I am verily a man which am a Jew, born in Tarsus, a city in Cilicia, yet brought up in the city at the feet of Gamaliel, which also was a priest, and taught according to the perfect manner of the law of the fathers, and was zealous toward God, as ye all are this day. Acts 22 and 4. And I persecuted this way unto the death, binding and delivering into prison both men and women. Excuse me. Acts 22 and 5. As also the high priest does bear me witness in all the estate of the elders, from whom also I received letters unto the brethren, and went to Damascus to bring them that which were there, bound to Jerusalem, to be punished. So these verses are letting us know what Paul did. And the background of these 3 verses is that after Paul's conversion, and he was on his way back, this was when he encountered a group of Jews from Asia, and they wanted to put him to death because they felt he had fouled the temple by bringing in Greeks and Gentiles. And so the Roman authorities allowed Paul, they took him in, allowed him to be safe. And when Paul talks about himself in these 3 verses, he's trying to justify himself. This is his defense. Verses 3 through 5 is Paul's defense against what the Asian Jews had accused him of. In verse 3, he begins his defense by affirming that he is of Jewish heritage. And then he talks about establishing loyalty to Jesus, emphasizing his place as a Jew. Paul also reflected the accuracy that he knew the Jews had charged him with, the accusations that the Jews had charged him with. And he insisted on showing them how zealous he was. He was just as zealous about defending Christianity and what God had asked him to do as he was about killing the Jews. So these verses are actually Paul trying to defend himself after he was allowed to speak to the Jews. So this was a pretty frightening moment for Paul, because he had to defend himself against a group that he was a part of. So in our second scriptures, a faithful witness conversion, Acts 22, 6 through 11. And I will read Acts 22, 6 through 8. And it came to pass that as I made my journey and was come nigh unto Damascus about noon, suddenly there shone from heaven a great light round about me. And I fell unto the ground, and heard a voice saying unto me, Saul, Saul, why persecutest thou me? Acts 22 and 8. And I answered, Who art thou, Lord? And he said unto me, I am Jesus of Nazareth, whom thou persecutest. In these verses, Paul is giving an account of what happened to him on the road to Damascus. And so here again, this is a defense where he's given a description of a supernatural event that happened to him and how he encountered Christ. Paul's changed behavior had not been known to the new Christians at this time. And because this supernatural intervention is because God's sovereignty, and God redirected Paul's zeal. And so this is why Paul is so important in the New Testament, because he was just as zealous about working for Christ as he was about killing the Jews at the time. So we have to look at how his behavior was directed. He described this experience as a light and a voice appearing to him, saying, why was he persecuting? But Paul at first didn't know who this voice was coming from. And so as we read our next scripture, we find out that the Lord identifies himself to Paul. And so in verses 22:9, and and they that were with me saw indeed the light and were afraid, but they heard not the voice of him that spake to me. And I said, what shall I do, Lord? And the Lord said unto me, arise and go into Damascus, and there it shall be told thee of all things which are appointed for thee to do. Acts 22:11. And when I could not see for the glory of that light, being led by the hand of them that were with me, I came to Damascus. So we have to remember when Paul got into Damascus, he was blind. But he was told that if he went there, he would find out what his mission would be, and he would encounter someone who would tell him that. And when he describes this calling as a light that appeared to him, which blinded him, and a voice telling him what to do, and also he asked, "Who is this? Like, who am I talking to?" And the Lord identified himself. He said, "I am the Lord who you persecuted." He said, "I am Jesus of Nazareth." So this is an important point in Paul's conversion. And so when we look at the directions that Paul was given, even after he was blind, he was told, Paul said, what am I to do? Where am I to go? And the voice said, if you go into Damascus, you will find someone there who will give you what you are supposed to do, who will appoint you in the right direction and show you what to do next. And that person was Ananias. So this is an important fact here, because Jesus took drastic measures to get Paul as one of his followers. And sometimes he has to take drastic measures with us to get us on the right track too. So this is one example, a very strong example of when God has something for you to do, you will do it. It might take a while, but you will do it. And so as we continue with talking about Paul and his commission, we talk about this last set of scriptures, a faithful witness commission. And after Paul got into Damascus and talked with Ananias, he found out what he was supposed to do and why this calling was so important. And basically, Paul was one person who really was responsible for the expansion of Christianity throughout the world, not just in Israel, but throughout the world. So we begin these verses with Acts 22:12. And one Ananias, a devout man according to the law, having a good report of all the Jews which dwelt there. Acts 22:13. Came unto me and stood and said unto me, Brother Saul, receive thou sight. And the same hour I looked upon him. Acts 22:14. And he said, the God of our fathers has chosen thee, that thou shouldest know his will, and see that just one, and shouldest hear the voice of his mouth. And Acts 22:15 sums up the whole issue of what Paul was to do. For thou shalt be a witness unto all men of what thou hast seen and heard. This was Paul's commission, his ultimate commission. And if you look at the many books that he wrote in the New Testament, they all was about spreading the gospel to various different places. He had several missionary journeys in which he was spreading the gospel. So he was really one responsible for moving Christianity into Europe and Asia, and all of the Samaria, throughout basically Turkey. He was responsible for moving Christianity in an area, in a sense that would affect all people. And so this was the commission that God had for Paul. And so his ultimate goal was to do God's will. And so in his conversion process, I imagine it was pretty frightening for Paul to be blind. He was completely blind. And when he went to see Ananias, he told him to open his eyes and look at his. He shall see again. And at the same time, he regained his sight. And so this is an interesting story, but it's one that we've heard over and over and over how Paul was converted. And it was a drastic conversion. It wasn't something that was nice, because I would imagine, if he was on his horse and got knocked off and blinded because of the light, that had to be pretty frightening. So this lesson just goes to show you God can commission even the worst of people to do his will. And that's really what this lesson is about, because they didn't get much worse than Saul. Remember, Saul is the mean person, and Paul is the person after conversion. So it doesn't get much worse, because Paul was a Jew, and he went after his own people. He was bringing the Jews to Rome to be punished for their religion. So this is another example where God had something special in mind for him. He was going to stop punishing the Jews and imprisoning the Jews on behalf of the Romans, because he would seek out the Jews. That's why he was on his way to Damascus, to pick up Jews to take back to Rome to be punished. So this was a drastic move, but I think sometimes God has to take drastic moves with us to get our attention sometimes. And so that's basically kind of what this lesson is about. Is your witnessing can come in various shapes, form, illnesses, all different ways. So today's lesson is one that we have heard down through the years, but each time there's a different message. Our lesson today will deal with conversion and commissioning. It is saying when God wants you to do his work, he will make a way for you to get it done. Paul, before his conversion, was a staunch persecutor, as we've talked about, of Christians. And even going to Jerusalem or Damascus and getting men and women and bringing them back to Rome. God saw someone he could use. And we know Paul, upon his conversion, was just as committed to the work of Christ as he had been a persecutor of the Jews. And so when we look at what happened as Paul started working for Christ, he joined in and created many churches, and he moved towards the goal of accomplishing what God would have him to do. We are often like the Jews in trying to trust Saul after his conversion. We want to know if the person is for real. And this was one reason Paul got in trouble. And because they didn't know if he had really changed. And when we look at, he was facing a mob, and the Roman soldiers saved him. So here again, this can be applied to us today, because determining whether a person is authentic can be a challenge. Can be a challenge in the real world, but in the spiritual realm, there is clear evidence to determine if those claiming to be Christians are truly, genuinely, spiritually transformed. And that's the key word, is the transformation. Transformation refers to a complete and lasting internal change that influences a person's desires, values, behaviors, and thought patterns. These transformed values are guided by the Holy Spirit and continue as we grow more like Christ. And as we go forth, let us remember that God can bring about a change even in the worst of us. And so sometimes, if you look at the fruits of the Spirit and what they are, this is saying that, yes, there's ways to know if that person has been transformed. But oftentimes we prejudge them because they aren't transformed according to what we think they should be transformed. But God always has a plan. And we may not know his plan, but he knows what he has for that particular person. And so one thing this lesson should remind us is when a person comes forth, no matter what they've done in the past, don't be so judgmental. Because if you look at what Paul did, it doesn't get much worse than that. And so some of the things people do in life, that's what they do. And Christ has a way of transforming that very sinner, that very alcoholic, that very drug addict, whoever that person might be. So we don't know what God had in mind. And he can use anybody to get his point across. And we see that in this lesson. So as we go throughout our week, let us try to show that we have been transformed. You know, we aren't perfect. We aren't perfect, but we should show that we do have some Christian qualities about us, and not just like the guy on the street, maybe going off on a tangent or doing something that's really not good, a good way to treat others. So let's just be mindful, and I hope you have enjoyed this presentation, and I ask you to continue listening to our virtual Sunday school lesson each Sunday. Thank you.